Step into a world where the shadows of ancient castles conceal sinister plots, where the clang of swords on the battlefield not only decides life and death, but also unveils shocking secrets. Tonight, dim the lights, snuggle under your blanket, and let your mind wander through an epic saga brimming with honor, betrayal, and justice. You'll witness the fateful duel of the falsely accused Sir Kaelan, uncover Father Benoît's insidious machinations, and hold your breath watching Sir Tristan's bloody tragedy at a royal tournament, a death perfectly disguised, igniting a crisis beyond imagination. Follow Elara's desperate flight, the resilient widow holding the key to truth, and join us as we peel back the layers of secrecy behind the cold walls of a transforming justice system. This isn't just a story, it's a journey for truth, where even the faintest whisper can shake the entire world. If your heart has resonated with ours, don't hesitate to leave a like, a comment, letting us know where in the world you're listening from, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any other adventures.
The medieval night descends, chilling and heavy. You stand amidst a muddy arena, the scent of damp earth mingling with the visceral fear radiating from the silent crowd. Before you, two burly knights, their armor already streaked with mud and the promise of blood, are panting like cornered beasts. A sword, slick with exertion, has just flown from one of their hands, plunging into the ground, a chilling sign of waning strength. This is no glorious knightly tourney from a troubadour's song, where honor is a polished shield and victory a mere flourish. This is the brutal judgment for Marguerite, her dignity trampled by the vile hand of Jacques. And Jean, her husband, battles now to cleanse that agonizing shame. Marguerite's face, pale as parchment, flashes before your mind's eye, eyes wide with a terror that could curdle milk. Then a fleeting glimpse of Jacques' cunning smirk, a predatory gleam in his eyes as he melts back into the shadows of a torch-lit hallway. And there in your memory the heavy ornate buckle of a man's belt, falling with a dull clang onto cold stone. These fragmented images, quick as a hawk's dive, sear into your mind, planting the seeds of an unspeakable crime. You can practically feel the bone-deep chill of fear radiating from her, as if the very shadow of that heinous act is still engulfing the damp, fetid air around you. The coppery scent of fresh blood, a morbid perfume, now begins to waft through the arena, for this duel promises to unveil a truth only the ancient stone walls could ever truly know, a truth purchased with the currency of steel. The very air crackled with unspoken accusations, a storm of dark secrets waiting to break. Jean, a man whose face was usually carved from stoic granite, now seemed possessed by a righteous fury, each parry and thrust a guttural roar for vindication. His movements were almost feral, fueled by a rage so potent you could taste its bitter tang on your tongue. He was fighting not just for his honor, but for Marguerite's, for the very soul of his bloodline. His sword, a gleaming extension of his wrath, moved like a deadly viper, striking with relentless precision. Across from him, Jacques, a figure often described with a smile as slick as rendered fat, fought with a cold, almost surgical detachment. His movements were economical, cunning, every sinew strained, every parry a calculated risk. He was a master manipulator, his tongue as smooth as aged wine, but now his deceit was laid bare, to be judged not by rhetoric, but by the biting edge of steel. His almost predatory confidence, once a shield, now seemed to wither under the relentless assault. The raw, primal nature of the fight was laid bare. This wasn't about elegant footwork or intricate feints. It was about sheer, brutal endurance, about whose will could bend, whose spirit could be broken. The air was thick with the scent of exertion and desperation, a bitter cocktail that burned in your nostrils. You could see the glint of sweat on their brows, trickling down into their eyes, momentarily blinding them, making every movement a desperate gamble. Each stumble, each near fall sent a jolt of anxiety through the collective consciousness of the crowd. This was no glorious ballet of blades. It was a muddy, bloody struggle for survival, a visceral testament to the fact that divine justice, if it truly existed, was a cruel, agonizingly slow mistress, revealing her judgment drop by drop in blood and sweat. Justice with them was not a balanced scale, but a blind demon, swinging its sword wildly in the dark, awaiting a final scream. The clamor of the crowd intensified, a monstrous, many-headed beast howling for blood. You pressed forward, a mere commoner in a sea of faces, each one a mask of morbid fascination, their eyes glazed with a mixture of horror and exhilaration. The ground beneath your worn boots felt like a marsh, squelching with mud and the discarded hopes of those who had fought here before. You could hear the muffled thud of a gauntlet hitting a chest, a sickening sound that resonated deep within your own bones, a low, guttural note in the symphony of violence. It was clear that the rules of society, the intricate dance of courtesy and rank, were stripped away here, leaving only primal instinct. This combat was not merely a test of strength, but a test of spirit, of a deeply held belief in one's own innocence or guilt, a belief they felt God Himself would affirm through the outcome, a belief as fragile as glass. The unyielding finality of this medieval trial was chilling. For Marguerite, her very existence hung on the edge of a blade. If Jean lost, her accusation would be deemed false, and she would face the horrendous punishment for perjury, most likely being burned at the stake. The thought of her fragile body engulfed in flames sent a jolt of icy dread through your veins, like a serpent coiling in your gut. Such was the justice of their age. A woman's word, if unproven by a man's sword, was worth less than the mud underfoot. Her voice, weak as a whisper in a hurricane, seemed capable of reaching only God's ear. Before man, it vanished like morning mist. The silent agony in Marguerite's gaze, fixed on her husband with a desperate plea, was chilling than any scream, a testament to the suffocating injustice she faced. This spectacle was a cruel reminder that even the highest social standing offered little protection against the capricious hand of medieval fate when honor was challenged. The duel continued, a relentless dance of death. Jean, though burdened with the weight of his wife's honor and the stain on his own name, fought with a desperate ferocity, his movements precise and purposeful, driven by an unshakable belief in Marguerite's truth. You could almost feel the phantom weight of his sword in your own hand, the burning desire to strike down injustice. Every parry, every thrust was a desperate plea for divine intervention. Jacques, however, fought with the chilling composure of a seasoned predator, his eyes cold and calculating, betraying no emotion. He was a master manipulator, his tongue as smooth as aged wine, capable of twisting truth into any shape he desired, each lie as sweet as poisoned honey. He moved with an almost unnatural grace for a man in heavy armor, dodging Jean's desperate blows with an unearning ease. The air crackled with their unspoken hatred, a palpable tension that made your teeth ache.
The crowd swayed back and forth, a living, breathing entity, each gasp and cheer a collective pulse, their collective breath hanging heavy in the cool air. You found yourself holding your own breath, your muscles tensed as if your own fate hung in the balance of each swing. It's an odd thing to be so personally invested in a conflict that isn't your own.
Yet in a world where rumor was currency and reputation was everything, the stakes for everyone felt incredibly high. The metallic clangs of sword on shield echoed in your ears, a deafening symphony of medieval discord that grated on your very soul. The smell of sweat and fear intensified, mixing with the damp earth and the faintest hint of something metallic. Blood. You watched, mesmerized, as the two men circled each other, their bodies moving like well-oiled machines, each one a living weapon. This was the rawest form of justice, where the stronger, or perhaps the more favored by God, would ultimately prevail. The rhythmic clang of steel began to slow, replaced by the ragged, tortured breathing of the combatants. Both men were weary, their movements heavier, their blows less precise, each motion costing them dearly. The raw, primal nature of the fight was laid bare. This wasn't about elegant footwork or intricate feints. It was about sheer endurance, about who could suffer longer, whose will was stronger, whose spirit would finally break under the immense pressure. The air is thick with the scent of exertion and desperation, a bitter cocktail that burns in your lungs. You could see the glint of sweat on their brows, trickling down into their eyes, momentarily blinding them, making every movement a desperate gamble. Each stumble, each near fall, sent a jolt of anxiety through the crowd, a collective intake of breath. This was no glorious ballet of blades. It was a muddy, bloody struggle for survival, a visceral testament to the fact that divine justice, if it truly existed, often arrived cloaked in suffering. Then, with a desperate, guttural roar, John found an opening, a momentary lapse in Jacques' usually impenetrable defense. His sword, heavy with purpose and the weight of his wife's honor, plunged forward. There was a sickening thud that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath your feet, and Jacques let out a high-pitched, almost feminine shriek, collapsing to his knees. The crowd erupted, a cacophony of shouts, gasps, and renewed roars. Jean slumped, his body a lifeless heap in the mud, his last breath a whisper carried away by the wind, gone before anyone could truly register it. The stillness that followed was profound, heavy as a shroud, punctuated only by the ragged gasps of the victor. Jean stood over his fallen foe, panting, his chest heaving, his sword dripping crimson, a macabre paintbrush of victory. He had won. Justice, as interpreted by the blade, had been served. But as you looked at Marguerite, her face still etched with the trauma of the accusation, a question lingered in your mind, cold as the medieval night. Had the brutal reality of the duel truly brought absolute justice, or merely a brutal end to a truth far more complex, far more deeply buried? The air, once electric with tension, now felt strangely empty, charged only with the lingering echoes of battle, like the fading resonance of a struck bell. The metallic tang of fresh blood hung heavy, a grim reminder of the savage price of truth in their unforgiving world. As the spectators dispersed, their voices a low, uncertain hum, you noticed the various reactions. Some cheered Jean as a hero, their faces beaming with relief and satisfaction, their belief in God's judgment unwavering. Others, particularly those who had been close to Jacques or harbored their own doubts, wore expressions of somber disbelief, their grief a silent protest against the brutal verdict, a deep-seated suspicion lingering in their eyes. You even saw a few women huddled together, their faces pale, whispering amongst themselves, their fear palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the fragility of their own existence in such a world. It was clear that while the duel had brought a legal resolution, it hadn't extinguished the doubts or changed the perceptions of everyone. The injustice, for some, would forever remain a festering wound beneath the surface of this supposedly righteous judgment, a poison seeping into the collective consciousness. You watched as the body of Jacques was unceremoniously prepared to be dragged away, a stark image of defeat and the unyielding finality of medieval justice. His armor, once gleaming and proud, was now caked with mud and blood, a shattered shell, a testament to his ultimate failure. The sight was a stark reminder that even the most formidable men, those with the silver tongue and cunning minds, could be reduced to nothing more than a lifeless husk by the unforgiving blade of fate. And what of Marguerite? Her ordeal wasn't truly over. Even with her husband's victory, the whispers, though quieter, would likely persist, clinging to her like cobwebs. Her reputation, once dragged through the mud of public accusation, could never be fully cleansed. The scars of such a public ordeal, even if proven false by divine combat, would remain etched on her soul, a permanent, haunting shadow. Her victory felt bittersweet, a testament to endurance rather than unadulterated triumph. A cruel paradox. This initial journey into the past has just begun, and the stories yet to be unveiled promise to be even more brutal and tragically revealing.
The scent of fear clung to the cold stone, a permanent resident in the grand halls of Lord Thierry's castle, suffocating Isolde like a heavy shroud. Just moments ago, you witnessed her final desperate act, a whispered accusation, a defiant challenge to her tormentor, a beacon lit in the darkest night. Now the weight of that challenge pressed down, heavy as a tombstone, promising either deliverance or damnation. Isolde, a woman whose fragile exterior belied a spirit forged in steel, stood trembling yet resolute, her gaze fixed on the monstrous man who had claimed her as his wife. The very air thrummed with the shocking audacity of her claim, a whisper that threatened to unravel the meticulously woven tapestry of power and deceit that was her marriage. This wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing gamble, the last arrow in a quiver emptied by years of silent suffering. In the 14th century France, love and marriage were often complex, tangled webs, not delicate bouquets of roses. You witnessed countless arranged marriages, where affection was a costly luxury, and vows sworn before God could be shattered by greed or blatant betrayal, leaving souls withered like forgotten flowers. This was painfully true for Isolde, a young woman with a delicate appearance, but eyes that held an unyielding resilience, like twin embers glowing in the twilight. Isolde, the daughter of a minor landowner, had been forcibly wed to Lord Thierry, a man notorious for his brutality and advanced age. His desire for her fertile lands, long coveted by the Thierry family, outweighed any consideration for her happiness, casting a dark shadow over her fate. You saw the utter despair in her eyes on her wedding day, a silent scream trapped within her soul, like a fragile bird caged in a golden prison, its song forever silenced. Her married life was a silent, agonizing torment, each day a relentless siege against her spirit, chipping away at her very essence. Thierry relentlessly abused her, not just physically but psychologically, twisting her mind with cruel words, each syllable a barbed hook, effectively transforming his magnificent castle into a personal dungeon. His words, sharp as razors, whittled Isolde's soul into a distorted shape, constructing the castle walls from her very own fear. The persistent scent of dampness and fear always clung to her, a suffocating presence, even in her fitful sleep, seeping into her dreams like a chilling mist. In this desolate existence, Isolde sought solace in the small, unassuming chapel within the castle walls, a sanctuary from her waking nightmare, a tiny island in a churning sea of despair. It was there, amidst the flickering candlelight and the faint aroma of incense, that she first encountered Duels, a young soldier whose kind heart and understanding eyes offered a lifeline in her drowning world. His presence was like a gentle breeze in a stifling room, a breath of fresh air in her suffocating reality, a quiet melody in a symphony of screams. Their shared moments in the hushed sanctity of the chapel, away from Theory's ever-watchful gaze, fostered a clandestine affection, forbidden fruit blossoming in the shadow of tyranny. One day, as Yills inadvertently brushed Isolde's hand while passing a prayer book, a tiny, searing spark shot through her skin, igniting a fragile, ephemeral hope within her desolate heart. Another afternoon, you observed Yills subtly placing a small wild flower plucked from the castle grounds onto Isolde's window ledge, a silent sign of his nascent courage and tender affection. Sweet as honey, but as deadly as viper's venom, knowing all too well the perilous path they walked. Isolde's thoughts, you knew, revolved around Yills not merely as a lover, but as a bastion of understanding, a quiet harbor in her tempestuous life, offering a respect and tenderness she had never received from Theory, who treated her as little more than property. These hurried touches, stolen glances, and whispered confessions in the cloak of night all carried the pungent scent of imminent danger, a volatile perfume that hinted at explosive consequences. This was a love born of desperation and solace, a flickering flame in a tempest. Yet every secret meeting, every shared sigh, was a gamble with stakes far higher than either of them could truly comprehend. A fragile house of cards built on the edge of a precipice, threatening to collapse at any moment.
One fateful evening, the fragile tapestry of their secrecy unraveled, torn apart by the monstrous hand of Thierry. You, moving like a phantom through the castle's shadowed corridors, had often observed Thierry's creeping paranoia, his eyes like hungry vultures, always searching for weakness. This night, his suspicions led him to Isolde's private chamber. You remembered seeing him, his large frame silhouetted against the flickering torchlight, his hand, thick and cruel, methodically tearing through her small wooden chest, a thief of privacy. He had found them. The letters Gilles had so tenderly sent to Isolde, innocent declarations of affection that in his twisted mind became proof of heinous betrayal. As his eyes scanned the delicate script, you watched as a slow, horrifying transformation twisted Thierry's face, like a macabre vintage cartoon drawing, shifting from benign to grotesque. From a scowl of suspicion, it morphed into a rictus of pure, unadulterated rage, each muscle twitching, a harbinger of the hell about to be unleashed. His discovery ignited a brutal, uncontained fury within him, a conflagration that threatened to consume everything in its path, leaving only scorched earth behind. Gilles was dragged before Thierry, mercilessly beaten, each blow a hammer stroke against the anvil of justice, his defiant cries echoing through the cold, unforgiving stone halls, a raw symphony of pain. Isolde, too, was subjected to a horrific ordeal, relentlessly tortured and interrogated, a desperate attempt to extract a confession that would condemn them both, her screams tearing through the very fabric of the silent night like jagged shards of glass, piercing the heart of the unsuspecting castle. In one agonizing moment, you, unseen, managed to slip a small, stale piece of bread and a damp cloth through a crack in her dungeon door, a silent, desperate act of compassion, a tiny lifeline in a sea of torment, knowing it might be the only comfort she found. You also overheard Dards discussing Thierry's chilling words. He means to make an example, not just of the boy, but of the lady, too. He suspects her defiance hides more than just a lover's folly. He fears her very will. In that moment, hovering on the precipice of death, her body racked with pain, Isolde's senses were overwhelmed.
The metallic tang of blood filled her mouth, acrid and sickening, while the horrifying smell of singed flesh, perhaps her own, clung to your memory like a haunting specter. Thierry, his voice a chilling pronouncement of doom, sharp as a guillotine's blade, declared his intention to put Gilles on trial for treason and adultery, a death sentence masquerading as justice. He further threatened to cast Isolde into the deepest, darkest dungeon, a living tomb where she would slowly rot, her suffering a testament to his absolute power. But facing Thierry's relentless cruelty and the imminent threat of oblivion, a spark ignited within Isolde. With every fiber of her remaining strength, a strength she didn't know she possessed, she made a terrifying yet undeniably courageous decision. She raised her bloodied head, her voice, though hoarse, ringing with an unprecedented clarity. She accused Thierry of having brutally violated her, of an unspeakable crime against her person. She then challenged him to undergo trial by combat, to prove his innocence before God and man, knowing full well that if he lost, her accusation would be proven true. This was the ultimate declaration of war from a woman pushed beyond all limits, a breathtaking explosion of defiance in the face of despair. The words, once uttered, hung in the frigid air, heavy with consequence, echoing in the stunned silence of the assembled guards and servants. Thierry's face, moments ago contorted in sadistic glee, now froze in a mask of shocked disbelief, then contorted further into a sneer of contempt. He, a powerful lord, challenged by a mere woman? The audacity was a stinging slap across his arrogant face, leaving a red handprint like a grotesque caricature. Yet the challenge once voiced could not be easily withdrawn. The ancient laws of France, though often bent to the will of the powerful, still held sway in matters of honor and severe accusation. A trial by combat, even for such a ludicrous claim against a man of his stature, was a sacred institution, a way for God to deliver his divine judgment. The sudden shift in power dynamics was palpable, a tectonic plate shifting beneath the feet of all present, forever altering the landscape of power. Isolde's desperate gamble was a calculated risk, a roll of the dice where her life and Gilles' were the stakes. She knew a direct accusation of adultery against her would lead to her immediate demise, a quick, brutal end. But an accusation of rape, especially against her husband, a lord, was a different beast entirely. It invoked a specific, archaic form of trial by combat that allowed her, as the accuser, to choose a champion to fight on her behalf, should a champion be willing to undertake such a perilous endeavor. This small, almost forgotten loophole in the labyrinthine medieval legal system was her only chance at survival, a slender thread in a vast, dark abyss. The very air shimmered with the weight of her courage, a fragile butterfly daring to challenge a storm, its wings beating defiantly against the gale.
The days that followed were a blur of legal maneuvering and hushed gossip. Thierry, enraged by Isolde's defiance, tried every trick in his arsenal to invalidate her claim, to discredit her as a madwoman or a conniving harlot. His venomous words, sharp as shards of glass, were designed to tear at her sanity. But Isolde, bruised and broken, held firm. Her unwavering resolve, despite her physical weakness, was like a flickering candle in the darkest room, surprisingly resilient, casting long, defiant shadows. The very spectacle of her stand, a woman daring to accuse a powerful lord of such a heinous crime, began to turn the tide of public opinion, however subtly. People whispered in the market, in the churches, their murmurs like tiny ripples spreading across a pond. The seeds of doubt, once sown, began to sprout in the fertile ground of public curiosity, ready to blossom into rebellion. The challenge was officially accepted. A date was set, a location chosen. the same muddy field where countless lives had been decided by the sword. But first, Isolde had to find her champion. Tiri, confident in his power and reputation, gloated that no knight of honor would ever debase himself to fight for a loose woman like Isolde. His venomous words were meant to crush her spirit, to render her hope to ashes like dust in the wind. And indeed, many knights, when approached, scoffed at the idea, their expressions a mixture of disdain and amusement. They saw only scandal, not a plea for justice. You witnessed her desperation, her visits to various noble houses, only to be met with cold stares and dismissive words, each rejection a fresh wound, another nail in the coffin of her hope. Yet Isolde's spirit, though battered, remained unbowed. She believed in her truth, a conviction as solid as the castle walls themselves, a bedrock against the waves of despair. She continued her desperate search, her determination a silent, burning fire in her soul, refusing to be extinguished. This desperate search, this refusal to surrender, would define her. The weight of the world seemed to press down on her slender shoulders, yet she bore it with the quiet strength of a seasoned oak, its roots deep and unyielding. The challenge against Tiri was no longer merely a legal battle. It had become a crucible, refining Isolde's will, stripping away all pretense, revealing the raw, unyielding core of a woman pushed to her absolute limit. The stage was set, not just for a duel of swords, but for a profound examination of love, lies, and the inexorable loom of fate in a world where a woman's honor was as fragile as a butterfly's wing, yet her courage could stand as tall as a cathedral. The next journey promised to be even more perilous, as Isolde embarked on the desperate quest for a champion, her only hope for survival, a flickering flame in the encroaching darkness.
The heavy oak door slammed shut with a finality that echoed Isolde's dwindling hope, its resounding thud a morbid drumbeat against the silence of her despair. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee, mirroring the tempest within her soul. She stood, a frail silhouette against the encroaching twilight, her shoulders slumped under the invisible weight of 1,000 judgments. Isolde had just faced another noble, another knight, and found only the cold, unyielding wall of indifference, their eyes like chips of ice, reflecting back her own desperate plea as a cruel joke. Each refusal was a fresh wound, another agonizing splinter driven deep into her spirit. Yet her fragile body pulsed with a desperate, unyielding defiance. Her accusation against Lord Thierry, a stone thrown into a placid pond, had sent ripples of scandal across the land. But finding a champion to face his monstrous power was proving a task as impossible as catching smoke with bare hands, an endeavor that seemed to suck the very oxygen from the world. In the Middle Ages, women were often depicted as delicate blossoms, fragile and ethereal, never meant to dabble in the rough-and-tumble world of men's affairs, like disputes or violence. Yet you'd heard tales, and even witnessed firsthand, women who dared to rise, their spirits blazing like defiant torches, standing up to defend their own honor or that of their kin. They refused to accept their fate like silent lambs led to slaughter. You vividly recall Isolde's story from the previous chapter, her audacious accusation against Lord Thierry, a thunderclap in the suffocating silence. She knew she couldn't fight herself, her delicate hands unaccustomed to the brutal weight of a sword. The very notion struck you as absurd, like a chessboard where each pawn possessed its own desperate will, yet was bound by the rigid rules of the game, a cruel jest played out on a grand, bloody stage. The law of the land, in its labyrinthine wisdom, held a peculiar clause. Women could appoint a champion to fight on their behalf. But who would dare to champion a woman so thoroughly disgraced, an outcast in her own right, against a lord as powerful and vengeful as Thierry? You, a seemingly invisible presence, a shadow among shadows, moved through the cold, echoing corridors of these noble houses, a silent witness to Isolde's agonizing pilgrimage. You were close enough to hear every dismissive word, every sneering laugh. Isolde embarked on this arduous quest for aid, her spirit a flickering flame against a relentless gale. She was met with immediate, chilling rejection by renowned knights, their polished armor reflecting her desperation like distorted funhouse mirrors. These men, guardians of chivalry, recoiled from her plight, unwilling to entangle themselves in a scandal that could stain their carefully cultivated reputations with the mud of a woman's taint. You heard the venomous insults hurled at her, sharp as poisoned daggers, as she knocked on the heavy oak doors of countless lords and knights, her pleas for succor echoing in empty halls. One particularly arrogant knight, his face as flat and self-important as a marble bust, actually scoffed aloud, waving her away with a dismissive hand, as if shooing a rabid dog, his laughter ringing out like crystal daggers plunging into Isolde's already bleeding heart. They regarded her with contempt, their gazes stripping her bare, as if she were a diseased leper, contagious with her mere presence. The scent of despair began to cling to her, an oppressive stench, foul and stale, like an ancient forgotten dungeon. Her courage, though immense, was steadily chipped away by the relentless tide of public scorn and aristocratic dismissal. You felt a block of ice forming in your own chest, each no a hammer blow against the coffin of her hope and of your own, a silent cry escaping your lips, lost in the echoing void.
There were moments, agonizingly protracted, when you truly believed Isolde would simply surrender, collapsing under the crushing weight of prejudice and profound isolation. Her body, once delicate, now seemed to shrink visibly, her clothes hanging loose, her eyes sinking deep into their sockets like two black holes devouring all light. Each step she took in her desperate search for aid felt like a step further into the cold embrace of death, her breath ragged, her spirit barely clinging to life. You watched her trace invisible patterns on the cold stone walls, a silent prayer escaping her lips, her body trembling with fatigue and the sheer enormity of her task. The thought of her giving up, accepting her cruel fate, was a bitter pill to swallow, a tragic end to a story that deserved a defiant roar. It felt as if the entire medieval world, with its rigid customs and unflinching judgment, conspired against her, 1,000 invisible chains binding her spirit, threatening to choke the very life from her. But then, hope, fragile as a spider's thread, appeared from an utterly unexpected quarter. Sir Gareth, an aging knight, his once legendary prowess now eclipsed by years of quiet disgrace and self-imposed exile, agreed to be Isolde's champion. He was a man whose past was shrouded in whispers, a figure almost forgotten by the court, discarded like an old frayed tapestry. People spoke of him, if at all, with a mixture of pity and vague disapproval, as if his very existence was an inconvenient truth. His weathered face, etched with the lines of forgotten battles and silent sorrows, held a wisdom as ancient as the stones of the castle itself, a living map of past pain. It was rumored that Sir Gareth had once had a daughter, long since lost, who suffered a similar injustice, and a deep-seated grief for her had never truly abated, leaving a permanent ache in his soul. You vividly remembered a faded portrait in his dusty chamber, a young woman with Isolde's very eyes, her face etched with a familiar despair, a ghost whispering across time. This shared agony, a silent echo across time, connected him to Isolde in a way no other knight could grasp. You saw the tired yet resolute gleam in Sir Gareth's eyes as he listened to Isolde's harrowing account, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that promised not judgment, but profound understanding. He sat in his dilapidated tower, surrounded by the ghosts of his own past glories and failures, the faint scent of rust and old leather clinging to the air like a second skin. As Isolde spoke, Sir Gareth's ancient eyes, sunken with the weight of years, seemed to shimmer with a deep, festering pain, as if he were not merely hearing her words, but reliving the silenced cries of his own daughter from her cold, forgotten grave. The creaking of his old, worn armor, hanging lifelessly in the corner, sounded like the muffled groans of a dying soul. Yet paradoxically, it carried a glimmer of hope for Isolde, a faint melody of impending retribution, a beacon in the suffocating darkness. His acceptance was not a grand, chivalrous gesture born of a desire for glory, but a quiet, burdened promise born of empathy, a vow whispered to the ghosts of his past.
Their burgeoning relationship was not one of mere obligation, but a profound connection forged in the fires of shared suffering and a deep, burning desire for vindication. Sir Gareth, usually a man of few words, spoke to Isolde with a quiet intensity, his voice raspy as worn parchment, filled with an understanding that transcended mere legalities. He listened to her without judgment, a rare and precious gift in a world quick to condemn. He shared his own tale, not in boast, but in quiet confession of a past failure to protect his own daughter, a wound that still festered in his aged heart. His silent regret hung heavy in the air, a visible mist of sorrow, a weight he had carried for decades. Isolde, in turn, found in him not just a warrior, but a kindred spirit, a man who truly heard her, whose eyes mirrored her pain and her defiant strength. He began to train, slowly at first, each movement a painful reminder of his age, yet his resolve burned fiercely. You watched him, his body aching as he swung a blunted sword against an imaginary foe, the rhythmic thwack against the practice dummy, a dull drumbeat in the quiet courtyard. Every swing of his sword, though slow and ponderous, thundered against the very ground, a defiant warning to the demons lurking in the shadows. His aged body, seemingly a withered branch, concealed a surging current of life, stubbornly resilient enough to crack even the oldest stones. He was preparing not just his body, but his weary soul for a battle that would either redeem him or condemn him to eternal shame, a final, desperate gamble for peace. The grim set of his jaw, sharp as a winter's blade, spoke volumes of his grim determination, a testament to his unbreakable will. Isolde, too, found strength in his presence. She would sit nearby, sometimes braiding a small leather strap for his shield, sometimes merely observing, her presence a silent wellspring of encouragement, a constant reminder of the stakes involved. Their bond deepened with each passing day, woven from threads of despair and defiant hope. The bond between them was not of silk or velvet, but of the steel cables of shared suffering and a burning hunger for justice, so resilient no sword could sever it. The challenges they faced together were immense. The court gossiped, mocking Sir Gareth's age and Isolde's dubious claims. Their scornful laughter, sharp as broken glass, echoed through the halls, a cruel chorus of judgment, each note a fresh wound on Isolde's soul. Even some of Thierry's loyalists attempted to subtly sabotage Sir Gareth's preparations, spreading rumors of his failing health or attempting to bribe his few remaining squires. But the old knight, with Isolde as his silent, unwavering beacon, persevered through every obstacle, his focus fixed like a hunter on his prey, unyielding as granite. His resolve was a fortress, unbreachable by the petty arrows of gossip and malice, its walls rising higher with every challenge. Just when you thought Isolde might finally break, perhaps collapsing in the muddy town square before the very gates of Thierry's castle, Sir Gareth appeared, his silhouette against the pale sky like an ancient sentinel, a silent promise of hope, a sudden glorious sunrise after an endless night. This impending duel would not merely be about the truth of Isolde's accusation. It would be about Sir Gareth's redemption, his final chance to atone for past failures and find peace. It was also about the extraordinary resilience of a woman who dared to challenge the very foundations of a patriarchal society, whose courage was a quiet roar against the thunder of injustice. Isolde's strength, often underestimated, was now a shining beacon illuminating the dark corners of medieval prejudice. This fight would be a testament to her unyielding will, her unwavering belief in her own truth, even when the world around her sought to silence it. Their combined story, woven with threads of despair and defiant hope, was a powerful testament to the enduring human spirit, a narrative destined to echo through the ages. This next chapter would plunge them into the heart of the inevitable, where the sword would speak the final, brutal word.
The chill of dawn still clung to the air, but the stench of anticipation was already thick, a heavy cloak draped over the roaring crowd. Before you, Lord Armand, his face a mask of pinched righteousness, squared his armored shoulders. Opposite him, Bastien, broad-shouldered and grim, clutched his sword hilt, his knuckles white as bone. This was no mere joust for glory. This was a deadly dance for destiny, a dispute over a father's legacy, now to be decided by the brutal, undeniable truth of the blade. The murmurs from the assembled throng rose and fell like a restless tide, each voice a tiny wave of judgment, ready to crash upon the loser. A priest, draped in vestments, stood poised, his hand raised in a blessing that felt more like a damnation, sanctioning the violence to come. This was the raw, unvarnished face of medieval justice, a gamble with life itself, where souls and honor were the chips on the table, glittering darkly beneath the indifferent sky. The legal system in the Middle Ages was often as nebulous as morning mist, shifting and obscuring truth rather than revealing it. You found yourself drawn into cases where physical evidence was a lavish commodity, almost non-existent, and witness testimonies were as pliable as warm wax, easily twisted by gold or fear, like clay in a potter's hands. One notable case etched itself into your memory, a festering wound in the grand tapestry of justice, this bitter inheritance dispute between two half-brothers, Lord Armand, the legitimate but unloved son, and Bastien, the favored bastard, to whom their father, in a final act of rebellion against convention, had bequeathed a larger share of his fortune. People often whispered that God would render a fair judgment through the sharp edge of a sword, a solemn promise from the heavens. This notion sounded noble, a poetic ideal whispered by bards, but in brutal reality, it was often little more than a convenient excuse to legitimize cold-blooded murder, shrouding brutality in the veil of piety, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. You observed priests present, not to prevent the impending violence, but to bless the combatants, as if signing their passage to a divine referee, transforming a savage brawl into a sacrament. It felt like a deadly game of chance, but instead of mere coins, you wagered your very soul and your honor on the outcome, a chilling thrill echoing through the bone-dry stadium. This case, however, was not as straightforward as a common inheritance squabble, a mere family quarrel over dusty scrolls and forgotten heirlooms. You, a humble servant within the retinue of the magistrate, Count Emile,
possessed a unique vantage point, a quiet shadow moving unseen through the grand, echoing halls. It was in these very corridors, thick with the scent of beeswax and old ambition, that you had inadvertently caught fragments of hushed whispers. The parchment-dry rumors spoke of a forged will, a cruel twisting of a dying man's last wishes, a betrayal as sharp as a viper's fangs, poised to strike. And the insidious architect behind this treachery, the whispers claimed, was none other than Armand's trusted confidant, a man whose pious demeanor and flowing robes belied a chilling cunning, Father Benoît. You remembered him well, his face a study in placid devotion, yet his eyes, when he thought no one was watching, held a calculating gleam, sharp as a newly honed blade, hinting at the sinister depths beneath his saintly facade, a serpent hidden in a garden of lilies.
A chilling memory, sharp as a sudden chill in a warm room, pierced your thoughts. Just days after the old lord's death, when the castle still reeked of grief and solemnity, a palpable sorrow hanging in the air, you had been moving silently through a dimly lit passageway, a forgotten phantom in the castle's bustling life. You had seen Father Benoît, his back to you, hunched over a flickering brazier in a secluded antechamber. He was not praying. He was systematically, almost ritualistically, feeding an ancient, crackling parchment into the hungry flames. The acrid stench of burning paper, tinged with something sickly sweet like old parchment, still clung to your memory. A horrifying perfume of destruction and hidden sin, a scent that crawled up your nostrils and settled deep in your throat. He didn't know you saw him, a fleeting glimpse in the shadows, but the image was seared into your mind, a haunting tableau of quiet malice, a painting of betrayal framed by the dancing flames. Suddenly, the duel between Armand and Bastien transcended a mere dispute over inheritance. It became something far more sinister, a lethal consequence of a carefully orchestrated, brutal conspiracy, a spiderweb of lies woven around innocent lives. You found yourself standing at a terrifying crossroads, the path before you split by a chasm of moral choice. You could expose the truth, a truth as volatile as gunpowder, and face the formidable wrath of Father Benoît, a man whose influence stretched like an octopus's tentacles throughout the court, whose smile hid teeth as sharp as a wolf's. Or you could remain silent, a silent accomplice to injustice, and allow an innocent man, Bastien, to face a likely death on the muddy field, a sacrifice to a meticulously crafted lie. The weight of this decision pressed down on you, heavy as a millstone, threatening to crush your very spirit, leaving you broken and hollow. This story had morphed from a general example of medieval law into a thrilling, high-stakes investigation where you, the humble observer, were now intimately entangled in unearthing a truth buried deep beneath layers of false honor and sworn oaths, a truth that screamed silently from the shadows, begging to be revealed. The tension in the arena was a tangible thing, thick enough to chew, a suffocating blanket woven from fear and anticipation. The two brothers, locked in a dance of steel, moved with a brutal elegance, each blow a declaration, each parry a desperate plea for salvation. Armand, fighting with the frenzied desperation of a cornered rat, was surprisingly agile for a man of his build. His blows were wild, yet powerful, designed to overwhelm rather than to skillfully dissect, like a blunt instrument against a delicate mechanism.
Bastion, on the other hand, fought with a controlled fury, his movements precise and economical, honed by years of surviving on the fringes of nobility, a predator in a world of prey. His sword sang through the air, a deadly melody, each note a challenge to his brother's legitimacy, a stark question echoing across the blood-soaked ground. You knew with a certainty that chilled you to the bone that Bastion's life was truly at stake, not just his inheritance, but his very breath, his heartbeat, the rhythm of his existence. The crowd's roar, a monstrous beast of 1,000 throats, was a constant reminder of the life-and-death stakes, a symphony of bloodlust, rising and falling like the waves of a hungry sea. Your mind, a whirlwind of doubt and fear, raced with possibilities. How could you expose Father Benoît? He was a man of the cloth, seemingly beyond reproach, his reputation as unblemished as freshly fallen snow, a beacon of piety in a corrupt world. To accuse him would be to invite scorn, disbelief, and potentially his lethal retribution. You had no concrete proof, only a fleeting, horrifying memory of burning parchment and a chilling scent. The evidence you held was as ephemeral as a wisp of smoke, yet as leviant as a lead coffin, dragging you down into the depths of uncertainty. Your position as a mere servant, insignificant in the brand hierarchy of the court, rendered you powerless, a voiceless phantom in a world ruled by powerful men and their ruthless ambitions, a tiny ant trying to move a mountain. The very thought of stepping forward, of speaking truth to power, sent shivers down your spine, like spiders crawling over your flesh, raising goosebumps on your skin. Yet, as Armand landed a particularly brutal blow, sending Bastion staggering backward, a fresh wave of determination surged through you, a fire ignited deep within your soul. The sight of Bastion's pained gasp, the brief flash of fear in his eyes, solidified your resolve. You couldn't stand by and watch an innocent man perish because of a lie orchestrated by a viper in the robes of a priest, a wolf in shepherd's clothing. The injustice of it gnawed at your soul, a hungry worm burrowing deep within your conscience, consuming your peace. You knew the risks. Your life could be forfeit, but the weight of silence, the burden of complicity felt heavier than any fear of death, a leaden cloak suffocating your very being. The image of Father Benoît's calculating eyes, like cold, glittering gemstones, pushed you forward, urging you to act, to become the hand of fate. A plan, desperate and embryonic, began to form in your mind, fragile as spun glass, yet hardening with each passing second. You needed more than a memory. You needed something tangible, something that could tip the scales of justice. You remembered the small, cramped scriptorium within the castle, where the old lord's scribes had meticulously copied documents. Perhaps, just perhaps, there might be a draft of the true will, a discarded fragment, a whisper of truth amidst the deceit, a needle in a haystack of lies. The idea was a flickering candle in the vast darkness, a tiny flame against the raging storm of uncertainty, threatening to be snuffed out at any moment. You knew the scriptorium was usually deserted during the duel, most of the castle staff drawn to the macabre spectacle in the arena, their morbid curiosity outweighing their duties. This might be your only chance, a fleeting window of opportunity, a fragile gift from destiny. As the clanging of swords intensified in the distance, a raw, percussive rhythm of death, a raw, percussive rhythm of clashing steel, you made your move. Slipping away from the throngs of spectators, you moved with the practiced stealth of a shadow, blending into the castle's ancient stones, a ghost walking among the living. The hallways, usually bustling with servants and courtiers, were eerily quiet, a silent accomplice to your clandestine mission, holding their breath in anticipation. The air grew colder as you descended into the lower levels, the scent of damp earth and stale parchment growing stronger, filling your lungs with the aroma of forgotten histories. Your heart hammered against your ribs like a trapped bird, each beat a drum of impending discovery, a frantic melody of fear and hope. You reached the scriptorium, its heavy wooden door creaking open with a sound like a distant groan, revealing a chamber shrouded in dust and neglect, its secrets waiting to be unearthed. Inside, the dim light barely pierced the gloom, struggling against the thick blanket of darkness. Scrolls, bundles of parchment, and stacks of old books lay haphazardly on tables and shelves, a chaotic testament to forgotten knowledge, a silent library of untold stories. You began your frantic search, your hands trembling slightly as you sifted through countless documents, each one a potential key to Bastion's salvation or your own doom, a coin toss between life and death. Time felt like a monstrous, invisible beast, its breath hot on your neck, its relentless march counting down the moments until the duel's inevitable conclusion, ticking louder with each passing second. Every rustle of parchment, every creak of the ancient timbers sounded like the footsteps of discovery, a monstrous whisper closing in, ready to snatch you from the shadows.
You found nothing. Despair, a cold, insidious vine, began to coil around your heart, squeezing the life from your hope, leaving you breathless. Just as you were about to give up, to concede defeat to the overwhelming forces of fate, your gaze fell upon a small, hidden compartment beneath a particularly dusty writing desk, almost entirely obscured by a pile of forgotten quills, a silent secret held by the very furniture. It was a secret whispered by the wood itself, a silent invitation to a hidden truth, a glimmer of light in the overwhelming darkness. With trembling fingers you pried it open, the sound of faint click in the suffocating silence. Inside lay not a will, but a small, leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, and nestled within its pages, a single, carefully preserved lock of hair, delicate as spun moonlight, and a small, elegantly crafted silver locket engraved with a single poignant word, Elara. A sudden, startling revelation struck you, sharp as a lightning bolt, illuminating the dark corners of your mind. Elara. You remembered the old lord's first unacknowledged daughter, born out of wedlock, quietly sent away to live in a convent in her youth, a detail often forgotten, dismissed as a minor scandal of a bygone era, a footnote in history. You remembered the whispers that Sir Gareth had a daughter named Elara who suffered a similar injustice, a brutal truth he rarely spoke of, a pain he carried like a shield. The pieces of another puzzle, one far older than Bastion's plight, began to fall into place, forming a complete, heartbreaking picture. This locket, this lock of hair, they were not evidence of Benoît's treachery, not directly, but they were something else entirely, a hidden truth of the old lord's past, a silent testament to a secret love, a life forgotten, yet now strangely relevant, a ghost reaching out from the past. The revelation hit you like a physical blow, a stunning twist in a story already laden with deceit, reshaping the very foundations of your understanding. Then, as if summoned by your very thoughts, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, drawing closer with each beat of your frantic heart. You froze, your breath caught in your throat, your heart hammering a frantic rhythm against your ribs, a drum solo of terror. Someone was coming. You barely had time to shove the journal and lock it back into their hiding place and slam the compartment shut before the door creaked open, revealing the imposing figure of Father Benoît. He stood there, his eyes, usually so placid, now gleaming with a cold, predatory intelligence, scanning the room like a hawk searching for prey. He didn't seem to notice anything amiss. his gaze sweeping over the silent piles of parchment, dismissing their silent tales. He was looking for something specific, something that wasn't there, something he had come to erase. His very presence in this neglected corner of the castle, far from the duel, confirmed your darkest suspicions. He was indeed protecting a secret, one far deeper than you initially imagined, a sinister web of deceit. He muttered something under his breath, a low, frustrated growl, then turned and left, his footsteps fading into the distance, carrying with them the last vestiges of danger. You remained hidden, your body trembling, fear and exhilaration battling within you, a tempest of emotions. You had found no smoking gun for Benoît's forgery, not yet, but you had uncovered a secret, a thread leading to another hidden truth, one tied to Sir Gareth's own painful past. The old lord's journal, the locket, the name Elara, these were not for Bastian's immediate salvation, but they were keys to a deeper understanding, a connection between the suffering of Isolde's champion and the silent injustice within the very family now battling in the arena. This journey had taken an unexpected turn, leading you down a path far more intricate and emotionally resonant than a simple legal dispute, a path winding through the forgotten histories of love and loss. The threads of love, lies, and the loom of fate were weaving into a tapestry far grander and far more tragic than you had ever anticipated. This story, you realized, was just beginning to unravel its true complexities, pulling you deeper into its dangerous embrace.
The steel-shod boots crunched on the grit of the training yard, each step a mournful cadence against the oppressive silence of Sir Kaelan's internal torment. Sweat, cold as fear itself, already slicked his brow, blurring the edges of his vision even before the first blow was struck. This was no ordinary practice. This was a prelude to judgment, a dance with destiny where a single misstep could condemn him to an eternity of shame. His breath hitched, a ragged gasp caught in his throat as the phantom cries of fallen men echoed in his ears, a ghostly chorus haunting his every waking moment, a symphony of lost souls. Across the yard, his opponent, Sir Ronan, a man once a brother in arms, now stood as an accuser, his gaze a burning brand upon Kaelan's soul, scorching his very being. The clatter of Kaelan's own practice sword against the shield was a dissonant chord, a grim symphony playing out the final act of his reputation, a funeral dirge for his honor. You carry within you the image of knights, their armor gleaming like polished mirrors, galloping across battlefields, symbols of valor. But in single combat, stripped of the cavalry's thunder, they often became ponderous, clanking machines, more iron than flesh, their movements burdened by the very protection meant to save them. You once witnessed a knight, Sir Kaelan, his face slick with sweat, battling an opponent in a muddy field, his armor a creaking cage, trapping him in a slow-motion dance with death. The metallic clang of blade on shield, sharp as a shriek, sounded like a discordant orchestra of 100 church bells struck simultaneously, making your ears ring. Yet you stood steadfast, like a living statue, absorbing Kaelan's every drop of sweat as a sacred ritual, a silent vow of unwavering loyalty. Honor for them was everything, a guiding star, the very air they breathed, a beacon in the stormy seas of medieval life. But sometimes the price of that honor was a crushing humiliation, a public spectacle of defeat, and a death as agonizing as any drawn-out torture. Duels between knights often revolved around disputes over land, inheritance, or the slightest perceived insult, a mere whisper of dishonor that could ignite a blaze of vengeance. Perhaps the shining armor, in its cold majesty, not only protected the body, but also masked the profound terror held deep within these men, a silent scream trapped beneath layers of steel, unheard by the roaring crowds. This story, however, delves deeper than property disputes or casual slights. It plunges into the dark heart of a man haunted by his past. This is the tale of Sir Kaelan, a knight once celebrated for his courage, his name a whispered legend across the land, a beacon of valor, but now facing a horrifying accusation. Cowardice in a past battle, a sin that led to the deaths of countless soldiers under his command, a stain on his indelible record. The accuser was none other than Sir Ronan, a man who had once been Sir Kaelan's sworn brother-in-arms, a loyal companion who had looked up to Kaelan as an idol, a shining example of true knighthood, his every word a testament to Kaelan's greatness. This accusation was not merely a public indictment, it struck at the very core of Kaelan's being, threatening to expose a secret he had meticulously buried for a lifetime. The memory of a fleeting moment of weakness, a single devastating wrong decision made in the swirling chaos and suffocating darkness of the battlefield, when he had been forced to choose between his own life and the lives of the men he swore to protect.
You, as a loyal squire, a silent shadow at Kaelan's heels, had witnessed his torment firsthand, a relentless specter haunting his every waking moment, feeding on his soul. The cold iron scent of his armor, mingling with the acrid stench of his own fear and sweat, clung to Kaelan even in his fitful sleep, seeping into your own dreams like a chilling mist, transforming you into a shared vessel of his torment. You'd seen him jolted awake by phantom screams, his eyes wide and vacant, as if still lost in the bloody haze of that fateful night. He carried the weight of those lost souls on his shoulders, a silent burden heavier than any plate armor, a cross he was forced to bear. Kaelan now faced not only Ronan's sharpened blade, but also the gnawing shame of his past, a battle fought within the confines of his own mind, a war with himself. He prepared for the duel not just physically. The relentless clang of his sword against his shield in the practice room reverberated like the very summons of fate, a deafening drumbeat marking the passage of his dwindling time. He prepared for the duel not just physically. The relentless clang of his sword against his shield in the practice room reverberated like the very summons of fate, a deafening drumbeat marking the passage of his dwindling time. He prepared for the duel not just physically, but also spiritually, grappling with an agonizing internal conflict. His soul was a battlefield, torn between the desperate need for vindication and the haunting question: could he, a man scarred by a moment of profound weakness, truly be worthy of victory and reclaim his honor, or was he forever tainted? You often found yourself alone with Kaelan in the hushed quiet of the armory, the scent of oil and steel thick in the air, a metallic perfume of impending conflict. You'd observe him running his gauntleted hand over the worn leather of his shield, his eyes distant, lost in the swirling mists of memory. You knew the whispers that haunted him, the cruel accusations of cowardice that had slowly poisoned his once sterling reputation, turning his name into a bitter epithet. Ronan's challenge, you realized, was a public execution of Kaelan's very soul, a desperate attempt to drag his idol into the mud, to shatter the very image he once revered. You remembered Ronan himself, a young, earnest face full of adoration, following Kaelan like a shadow, eager to learn, to absorb every lesson from his hero. You recalled a younger Ronan, his eyes sparkling like emeralds, gazing at Kaelan with absolute devotion, like a puppy following its master without question. He once told you, his voice brimming with youthful zeal, "Sir Kaelan is my guide, an unblemished hero. I will fight like him." Now that adoration had morphed into a cold, burning flame of hatred, scorching all beautiful memories, transforming Ronan into a sharpened blade aimed directly at his former mentor. The betrayal for Ronan was clearly deeply personal, a festering wound of shattered ideals, a betrayal of a bond once considered sacred. The training intensified. each session a grueling testament to Kaelan's grim resolve. He pushed his aging body beyond its limits, his muscles screaming in protest, his breath coming in ragged gasps. You would help him don his heavy plate armor, piece by agonizing piece, feeling the sheer weight of it, the metallic embrace that promised protection but also hindered movement, transforming a man into a living tank, a lumbering beast of war. His armor, once a symbol of his might, now seemed a walking machine, each step a grinding sigh of fate, each movement an extraordinary feat of will, as if he were dragging an entire mountain on his shoulders, an ant attempting to move a boulder. The clang of steel on steel, the sharp rasp of his breathing, filled the practice yard like a blacksmith's forge, hammering away at his body and soul, refining him for the ultimate test. He worked tirelessly on his footwork, on parrying Ronan's known aggressive style, on finding the weaknesses in his former protégé's defense. His movements, though not as swift as a younger man's, gained a methodical, brutal precision, each thrust a desperate plea for vindication, each block a defiant shout against the accusations. Each swing of his sword was not just against an opponent, but against a fractured part of his own memory, a broken image in his mind, Ronan's cries echoing in his thoughts like an endless curse.
Ronan, meanwhile, had become a public figure of righteous indignation, his voice ringing with conviction, his accusations poisoning the very air around Kaelan, turning every breath into a bitter taste. He spoke of honor, of betrayal, of the sacred duty of a knight, each word a hammer blow against Kaelan's already fragile reputation. You observed Ronan training, too, a stark contrast to Kaelan's tormented practice. Ronan moved with youthful vigor, his movements sharp and clean, fueled by a zealous belief in his own justice. His eyes, once filled with admiration, now held a cold, unwavering fury, like twin blue flames licking at Kaelan's legacy, ready to consume it whole. You also overheard whispers among the other squires. Father Benoît, that serpent in holy robes, had been seen in hushed conversation with Ronan, his face a mask of spiritual guidance, but his eyes gleaming with an unholy light. It was rumored that Benoît had offered Ronan subtle, spiritual counsel, perhaps even financial backing, subtly fanning the flames of Ronan's zealous accusations, turning him into a pawn in a larger, more sinister game. It seemed justice in this court was merely a cruel magic trick, blinding those who believed in it, and you wondered how many other innocents had stepped into this arena because of cleverly concealed lies, manipulated by puppets like Father Benoît, pulling strings in the shadows. The date of the duel approached with the inexorable dread of a death sentence, each passing hour a tolling bell. The entire court buzzed with anticipation, their morbid curiosity a palpable hum in the castle, a swarm of hungry flies drawn to impending doom. The air was thick with the scent of gossip and judgment, a sickening perfume of impending doom, cloying and inescapable. You watched Kaelan carefully, observing the subtle changes in his demeanor. He grew quieter, his gaze more distant, as if already walking on the field of judgment. Yet beneath the layers of weariness and quiet despair, you sensed a hardening, a resolution that had been forged in the crucible of his suffering, transforming him into something unbreakable. He wasn't fighting just for himself anymore. He was fighting for the memory of the men lost, for the truth of his choice, for the desperate hope that his name might one day be cleared, a final, desperate plea to history. As you walked with him towards the arena, the crowd's roar grew louder, a hungry beast awaiting its meal. The ground trembled beneath your feet, vibrating with the collective anticipation, a living pulse of morbid excitement, a drumbeat of doom. The cheering of the crowd morphed into a thousand-headed monster, each growl a curse, a cheer for death.
making the very ground beneath your feet tremble as if the earth itself quaked before the impending verdict, a symphony of blood and steel waiting to be played. Kaelan walked with a deliberate stride, his every movement a testament to his inner battle. This duel would not just decide his fate, but perhaps in its brutal honesty reveal a truth more profound than any man-made law could discern, a truth etched in blood and honor. It was a fight for honor, for redemption, and for the very soul of a knight burdened by a choice made in the shadows of war. The stage was set, the swords drawn, and the ancient law of God, enforced by the might of man, waited to deliver its merciless judgment.
The air, usually thick with the earthy scent of turned soil and distant wood smoke, now vibrated with a raw, primal energy, heavy as a thundercloud before a storm. Gaspard, his face a contorted mask of fury, wielded his wood-splitting axe like a madman, each swing a desperate declaration of war. Opposite him, Etienne, usually as mild as spring rain, gripped a heavy crowbar, his knuckles white as bone, his eyes wide with a desperate animalistic fear. The metallic clang of improvised weapons echoed through the small village square, a jarring symphony of impending doom, each strike a guttural cry for dominance. Around them, the villagers, a silent, grim chorus, formed a tightening circle, their faces reflecting a mixture of horror and grim fascination, their breaths held hostage by the unfolding brutality. This wasn't a knightly duel. This was a raw, bloody spectacle of peasant justice, where honor was a dirty word and survival was the only prize. It wasn't just the nobility who settled matters with brute force. You knew that all too well. You'd seen it countless times, etched into the very fabric of village life. The lives of peasants were already a brutal grind, a daily battle against hunger, disease, and the capricious whims of nature, their existence as fragile as a spider's web in a gale. But disputes among them sometimes erupted with even greater ferocity, unbound by the thin veneer of chivalric code. Someone might be accused of stealing a meager piglet, its squeals a desperate plea for justice, or perhaps blamed for ale spilled in the crowded tavern, a seemingly trivial slight. Instead of gleaming swords and heavy plate armor, you'd witness them using anything at hand, a sharpened hoe, a gnarled staff, a rusty kitchen knife, or even a dented frying pan, each object transformed into a deadly weapon. The pungent scent of livestock manure and cheap sour ale hung heavy in the air as two men grappled in a lawless brawl, their bodies twisting like tortured roots. Despite their crude brutality, these contests often served as a desperate, visceral release of tension, a primal scream in a world that offered few outlets, a way for them to reclaim their small, fiercely guarded honor. Perhaps for them, honor wasn't a glittering crown, but simply the right to hold their head high in the meager village market, to claim their tiny sliver of dignity. Imagine yourself a simple peasant, standing amidst the hushed, morbid crowd, witnessing the escalating, venomous quarrel between Gaspard, a cantankerous neighbor, his disposition as rough as unhewn timber, prone to picking fights, and Etienne, a mild-mannered carpenter, his hands calloused, but his heart gentle, yet possessing a small, coveted plot of riverside land that Gaspard had always coveted, his eyes glinting with avarice. The initial squabble, seemingly trivial, began over a single stray hen belonging to Gaspard that had wandered into Etienne's garden, its clucking a deceptively innocent sound. But that was merely the spark, the flimsy pretext. In truth, it was the final overflowing drop in a bitter generational feud over irrigation rights and land boundaries that had simmered between their two families for centuries, a deep festering wound in the very soil of the village.
The argument quickly escalated, words giving way to shoves, then to blows, and finally into a spontaneous, brutal duel right in the muddy village square, its ground already stained by the petty grievances of 1,000 past disputes. The air grew thick with the cacophony of enraged shouts and the crude, jarring impacts of farm implements. Gaspard's wood-splitting axe, heavy and unforgiving, clashing against Etienne's long crowbar, a makeshift spear of vengeance, echoing like a violent symphony of untamed fury, each note a declaration of lethal intent. There was no judge to mediate, no ancient laws to consult, only the merciless verdict of the seething crowd and the stark, brutal instinct for survival. You saw sweat and mud mingling on their faces, painting them with grotesque war paint, and the metallic tang of fresh blood began to permeate the air, a chilling premonition of death, as Etienne stumbled, his crowbar glancing off Gaspard's shoulder, leaving a red smear. Gaspard, seizing the opportunity, brought his axe down in a sickening arc. Etienne cried out, a guttural sound of pure agony, as the axe bit deep into his side. He crumpled to the muddy ground, a broken doll, his eyes wide and unseeing, his blood bleed spilling into the earth.
The brawl ended, not with justice, but with the tragic, brutal death of Etienne. The deafening roar of the crowd abruptly transformed into a stunned, terrifying silence, broken only by Gaspard's heavy, ragged gasps for air, each breath a painful testament to his exhaustion and the monstrous act he had just committed. Then the piercing, heart-wrenching sobs of Etienne's wife tore through the sudden stillness, a raw, primal wail of grief that twisted your gut and pierced your very soul. You watched her collapse beside her husband, her hands desperately trying to staunch the flow of blood from his fatal wound, a futile, tragic gesture. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of horror, the lifeless body of Etienne, the exhausted, panting Gaspard, and the shocked, silent faces of the villagers, their eyes reflecting a terrifying realization. This tragic outcome would force the entire village to confront a grave question, a dilemma that hung in the air like a pall. Would the aloof nobility intervene, their distant decrees reaching even this forgotten corner of the realm? Or would this simply be another unsolved case, another anonymous death, forever buried in the mud and misery of the countryside, swallowed by the uncaring earth? The ramifications of Etienne's death rippled through the small community like stones dropped into a stagnant pond, disrupting the fragile peace. Fear, cold and sharp, now mingled with the familiar scent of wood smoke. While such spontaneous acts of violence were not unheard of, a death, especially one so public and brutal, demanded a reckoning. The village elder, a man named Old Man Thibault, his face a roadmap of ancient wrinkles, his voice raspy as dry leaves, called for a meeting. He sat at the head of the communal table, his gaze sweeping over the grim faces of the villagers, a silent jury. He spoke of the need for order, for preventing further bloodshed, his words a desperate plea for sanity in a world teetering on the edge of chaos. Rumors began to swirl, carried on the whispers of the wind, weaving through the crooked lanes like mischievous imps. Some argued that Gaspard should be banished, cast out from the village, a pariah stripped of his meager livelihood. Others, emboldened by fear or perhaps secret allegiances, muttered that Etienne had in fact provoked Gaspard, that his death, though regrettable, was a consequence of his own obstinacy, a twisted form of peasant justice. You listened intently, observing the shifting loyalties, the subtle glances exchanged between neighbors, revealing cracks in the community's facade. You knew the long history of animosity between the two families, an ancient serpent coiling beneath the peaceful surface of village life. The chicken, the garden, the land near the river, these were mere proxies for a deeper, more venomous hatred, inherited through generations. The absence of formal legal structures meant that justice, if it came at all, had to be forged by the villagers themselves, a clumsy, often brutal process. They relied on ancient customs, on the weight of community opinion, and on the occasional reluctant intervention of the local lord. But the local lord, Baron Henry, was a man more concerned with taxes and hunting than with the messy disputes of his peasants. His attention is fleeting as a summer breeze. He preferred to let them sort out their own affairs, a dangerous freedom that often led to more violence, a self-perpetuating cycle of retribution. Days turned into a week, the silence from Baron Henry's castle growing louder, more deafening. The Baron was aware of the death, of course. His reeve, a stern man named Jules, had delivered the news, along with the usual tax collections. But no decree, no official pronouncement arrived. It seemed the Baron intended to let the village stew in its own fear and uncertainty, allowing the peasants to exhaust themselves with internal squabbling before he might deign to intervene, a strategic apathy. This inaction, however, was a dangerous gamble. It allowed the wounds in the village to fester, turning a single tragedy into a potential epidemic of distrust and revenge.
You observed Etienne's wife, Marie, her face a mask of profound grief, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen like bruised plums. She carried her sorrow like a heavy shroud, her silence more potent than any scream. She refused to tend her garden, her fields lying fallow, a stark testament to her overwhelming despair. Her children, clinging to her skirts, looked at the world with the wide, frightened eyes of orphaned lambs. You felt a deep ache in your chest, a familiar sorrow that resonated with Isolde's silent suffering, a common thread of injustice that bound women across the social strata. The official absence of a formal investigation meant that Gaspard was free, albeit shadowed by the grim stares of his neighbors. He continued his daily chores, though his movements were furtive, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows, like a hunted animal. The axe he used now seemed to carry a heavier weight, a silent accusation in his hands. The tension in the village was a palpable thing, thick as winter fog. People spoke in hushed tones, their voices barely above whispers, as if afraid to awaken a sleeping beast. The familiar communal activities, once filled with laughter and easy chatter, were now strained, punctuated by awkward silences and suspicious glances. The village well, usually a hub of gossip and camaraderie, became a place of hurried visits, everyone eager to leave the oppressive atmosphere. The children, usually playing freely, now stayed close to their mothers. Their innocent games were replaced by an unspoken anxiety. Then a new rumor began to circulate, subtle as a snake slithering through tall grass. It was whispered that Gaspard, emboldened by the lack of direct punishment, was beginning to encroach upon Etienne's land, the very plot that had sparked the fatal dispute. Small acts at first, moving a boundary stone a mere foot, allowing his goats to graze in Etienne's fallow field, their greedy mouths tearing at the meager grass. These actions were like tiny drops of acid, slowly dissolving the last vestiges of civility, provoking the raw grief of Marie and the simmering resentment of Etienne's few remaining kin. You saw Marie stand by her husband's grave, a small, unmarked mound of earth, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Her gaze, when it lifted, was not vacant, but burned with a quiet, terrifying resolve. She wasn't noble. She had no champion, no knight to fight for her. But you recognized that same unyielding spirit you had witnessed in Isolde, a silent wellspring of defiance. The question that lingered in the stagnant air of the village was grim. Would she, a peasant woman with nothing but her grief, find a way to seek justice, or would Etienne's death truly be buried in the mud, swallowed by the uncaring earth, another forgotten tragedy in a world quick to forget the lives of the common folk?
This narrative, unfolding before your very eyes, was a stark reminder that justice, even at its most brutal and primitive, was a concept fiercely sought by all, from the glittering castles to the humble, mud-caked villages. The next journey into this peasant's world promised a reckoning, perhaps even a new kind of defiance, forged not in steel, but in the raw, unyielding will of a grieving woman.
The lowing of the old cow, a mournful, guttural sound, echoed through the makeshift courtroom, a haunting lament in a place designed for human judgment. Before you, Bessie, her hide matted with mud and straw, stood bewildered, her large, dark eyes blinking slowly, utterly oblivious to the grim farce unfolding around her. This was not a trial of man against man. This was justice turned on its head, a bizarre spectacle where a beast stood accused of murder. The air hung heavy with the strange alchemy of fear and absurdity, a cocktail of dread and disbelief that made the hairs on your arms prickle, raising goosebumps like tiny mountains. A priest, his face stern as a stone gargoyle, intoned Latin prayers, his voice a drone against the cow's restless shifting. A count, resplendent in his finery, sat on a makeshift dais, his gaze a curious blend of solemnity and barely concealed amusement. This was medieval justice at its most perplexing, a chilling testament to a world where even the innocent, regardless of species, could become entangled in the cruel web of human law, its threads as fine as a spider's silk. This was perhaps the most peculiar spectacle you had ever witnessed, a scene ripped from the pages of a forgotten dream. In some regions, the labyrinthine legal systems of the Middle Ages held a bizarre conviction. Animals, too, could commit crimes. You'd heard whispers of a sow being executed for devouring a child, its grunts silenced by the hangman's noose, or a rooster solemnly tried and then burned at the stake for the unnatural act of laying an egg, its crowing silenced forever. A duck, they said, was once hanged for making too much noise in the early morning, its quacks deemed a violation of the peace, a crime against the fragile quiet of the dawn. It sounded utterly mad, a tale spun by drunken peasants, but the people, in their deep, unwavering faith, truly believed that both man and beast lived under the omnipresent judgment of God, their fates intertwined. I often wondered, did the animal truly grasp the meaning of justice, or was it simply driven by the primal instinct to fight for its very survival, its eyes reflecting only the terror of the unknown? These events, though rare and often dismissed as mere folklore, were vivid proof of the complex, sometimes unfathomable legal thinking of that distant era, a mirror reflecting the superstitious heart of the age. Imagine then your own bewildered presence, a silent observer in the rustic courtroom, as you witness the solemn proceedings against Bessie, an old placid cow, her days usually spent chewing cud in the verdant pastures. She stood accused of causing the death of a farmer, Gautier, a man known for his hearty laugh and strong hands. The accusation hung in the air, thick and heavy. She had gored him to death in a cornfield, her horns supposedly stained with his blood. The poor bewildered creature was brought forth, her ropes chafing her hide, dragged before this strange tribunal. A priest, his face a canvas of solemn piety, stood as Bessie's impromptu defense counsel, his Latin incantations a bizarre attempt to bridge the gap between divine law and animal instinct. A count, his robes rustling with an air of self-importance, sat on a makeshift dais, his gaze a curious blend of solemnity and barely concealed amusement. This was medieval justice at its most perplexing, a chilling testament to a world where even the innocent, regardless of species, could become entangled in the cruel web of human law, its threads as fine as a spider's silk. You watched, a silent participant in this macabre charade, as they painstakingly attempted to apply the rigid laws of man to the untamed, unpredictable world of nature, an effort that struck you as both ludicrous and tragically misguided. It was a desperate, almost comical attempt to force the chaos of the natural world into the neat, orderly boxes of human jurisprudence, like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, an exercise in futility. But what if Bessie was merely a scapegoat, a convenient sacrifice in a grander, darker scheme? You, as Gautier's neighbor, a silent keeper of village secrets, had heard the hushed whispers, the subtle tremors of rumor that spoke of a deep-seated feud between Gautier and his avaricious relative, a man named René, whose eyes always held a hungry glint when they fell upon Gautier's fertile land. Their dispute, a festering wound in the fabric of village harmony, was no secret, a festering sore on the face of the community.
A chilling memory, as sharp and cold as a shard of ice, pierced your thoughts, unraveling the neat narrative of Bessie's supposed crime. One fateful night, illuminated only by the faint, shimmering glow of the moon, you had been returning home late. You had inadvertently overheard furious shouting emanating from Gautier's humble cottage, a violent crescendo that clawed at the midnight stillness, tearing at the fabric of the night. Not long after, in the eerie silence just before dawn, you had seen René slipping away from Gautier's house, his movements furtive and hurried, like a thief in the night. The stale, cloying stench of cheap, potent liquor clung to him like a second skin, a sickening perfume of guilt and fear radiating from his very pores, assaulting your nostrils. His eyes, darting nervously in the faint light, held a wild, panicked gleam like those of a cornered animal. Only the ancient, weathered walls of Gautier's cottage truly knew the truth, their stones silently absorbing the secrets of that violent night. The trial of Bessie the cow seemed a simplistic, almost elegant solution to a messy human problem, a convenient scapegoat for a deeper, more sinister truth. But you felt, with a gnawing certainty that twisted your gut, that a far darker secret was being cunningly concealed, buried beneath layers of rural superstition and human greed, a monstrous lie hidden in plain sight. The trial itself was a peculiar blend of solemnity and farce. The Count, a minor nobleman named Lord Alaric, presided with an air of bored authority, occasionally stifling a yawn behind a gloved hand. He clearly found the whole affair beneath him, a tedious distraction from his more pressing duties of hunting and feasting, a nuisance to be dispatched swiftly. The priest, Father Anselm, a portly man with weary eyes, droned on, citing biblical passages and obscure theological texts that seemed utterly irrelevant to a bovine defendant. He spoke of Bessie's evil spirit and the need for divine judgment, his words painting the docile cow as a monstrous, malevolent force, a devil in bovine form. His voice, thick with Latin and misplaced piety, was like a heavy shroud, attempting to suffocate the simple truth beneath layers of archaic dogma, burying it under a mountain of words. The evidence itself was even more absurd. A tattered hat, supposedly Gautier's, found near Bessie in the cornfield, was presented as Exhibit A. A few strands of cow hair pulled from a nearby fence were gravely examined as if they held the secrets of the universe, microscopic clues to a grand conspiracy.
The witnesses were mainly villagers who had seen Bessie grazing peacefully, or who testified to Gautier's lifelong habit of napping in his cornfield, a dangerous but common rural practice. No one had actually seen the cow goring Gautier. The accusations were based entirely on circumstantial evidence and a convenient narrative that neatly tied up a sudden, violent death with a simple, blamable culprit. The entire proceeding felt like a theatrical performance, where logic and reason were merely minor characters, overshadowed by superstition and convenience, silent figures in a grand, absurd play. The verdict, when Lord Alaric finally delivered it, was met with a collective gasp, a ripple of uneasy murmurs through the crowd, like a disturbance on the surface of a still pond. Bessie, the placid, innocent cow, was found guilty of murder. She was condemned to be publicly executed, her hide to be flayed and her meat distributed to the poor, a gruesome display of justice, a macabre feast. The Count's voice, a monotone pronouncement of doom, felt like a heavy hammer striking the final nail into Bessie's coffin, sealing her fate with brutal finality. A sense of profound injustice, cold and suffocating, washed over you. The raw absurdity of it all, the blatant disregard for logic, was nauseating, a bitter taste in your mouth. This wasn't justice, it was a barbaric charade, a convenient way to dispose of a messy problem and perhaps to hide a far greater crime.
Your gaze drifted to René. He stood among the crowd, his face carefully neutral, a mask of feigned innocence. But his eyes, when he thought no one was looking, held a faint, almost imperceptible gleam of triumph, a flicker of satisfaction that sickened you, like venom in a chalice. He had won. He had manipulated the rigid, absurd legal system to his advantage, using an innocent animal as a shield for his depravity. The old lord's land, now Gautier's, would soon fall into René's greedy hands, stained with the blood of both man and beast, a testament to his ruthlessness. The weight of this silent knowledge pressed down on you, a monstrous burden on your conscience. You could not let this stand. You had to act, even if it meant risking your own life, your own meager existence, a solitary voice against a roaring tide. The night fell, a velvety cloak of darkness covering the village, its familiar sounds muted by the heavy mantle of dread. You waited until the last flickering lights in the cottages had died down, until the sounds of the night were only the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. You slipped out of your own humble dwelling, your movements stealthy as a cat, guided by a fierce resolve. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth. You made your way to Gautier's cottage, its silhouette a dark, hunched shape against the pale moonlight, a silent sentinel of untold secrets. The thought of Bessie, condemned for a crime she couldn't possibly comprehend, spurred you onward, a silent cry for the innocent, a burning ember of justice within your heart. The cottage door, surprisingly, was not locked. Perhaps René in his haste had been careless, or perhaps he simply believed no one would dare to question the divine verdict. You pushed it open slowly, the rusty hinges groaning in protest, a mournful lament in the stillness of the night. The interior was dark, thick with the stale scent of human life abruptly ended. You lit a small tallow candle, its feeble flame casting flickering shadows that danced like restless spirits on the rough-hewn walls. Your eyes scanned the room, searching for anything, any clue that might expose René's dark secret. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the window panes sounded like a ghostly whisper, a chilling warning, a chorus of unseen spirits. Then you saw it.
tucked beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, almost completely hidden from view, was a small, crudely carved wooden box. You pried open the lid, your heart hammering against your ribs. Inside, nestled among a few dried herbs and a faded ribbon, lay a short, wickedly sharp dagger, its blade still dull from lack of care, but its hilt splattered with dried, dark red stains. And next to it, a single, twisted lock of human hair, unmistakably belonging to Gautier, a silent, grisly trophy of a brutal act. The true weapon, the undeniable proof. René had not used a cow, he had used cold steel. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity, forming a complete picture of betrayal and murder, a masterpiece of malice. You held the dagger, its weight chilling in your hand, a tangible link to the truth. This was not just about Bessie anymore. It was about exposing a human monster, a man who had used superstition and the flawed justice system as his shield. The stakes were incredibly high. To present this evidence would mean directly challenging René, a man capable of unspeakable cruelty, and implicitly challenging the very judgment of Lord Alaric and Father Anselm, risking their wrath. But the image of Bessie's bewildered eyes, the mournful lowing that still echoed in your ears, ignited a fierce, unyielding resolve within you. This bizarre tale of an animal on trial was about to turn into a desperate, dangerous quest for true justice, a battle where the only weapon was the truth, as sharp and deadly as any blade. The path ahead was perilous, fraught with unseen dangers, but you knew, with a certainty that burned like a fever, that you could not, would not remain silent.
The thundering hooves of the war horses, a relentless drumbeat against the earth, shook the very ground beneath your feet, vibrating up through your bones. Two armored behemoths, Sir Tristan and Sir Cedric, knights locked in a ritualistic dance of death, hurtled towards each other across the dusty lists, their lances poised like vengeful spears of fate. The air, thick with the scent of nervous horses and eager crowds, crackled with a palpable tension, a living thing that tightened around your throat. A collective gasp, sharp as a sudden blade, rippled through the grandstands as their lances met, the deafening splinter of wood and the agonizing screech of tortured metal mingling with the roar of thousands, a monstrous symphony of destruction. You felt the violent whoosh of the lances as they tore through the air, unseen scythes of doom. This was more than a sport. It was a desperate gamble, a brutal testament to honor, and a chilling invitation to oblivion. You'd witnessed countless jousting tournaments, those grand spectacles where knights, resplendent in their polished armor, rode full tilt at one another with massive, gleaming lances. While they certainly bore the outward semblance of a sport, a dazzling display of horsemanship and martial prowess, they were, at their brutal core, still a formalized form of single combat, a ritualized means of resolving disputes among the nobility. The thundering hooves, like a sudden clap of thunder, rattled the very foundations of the viewing stands, making your heart pound a frantic rhythm against your ribs. The shattering crash of splintering wood and the agonizing shriek of metal as armor met armor created a deafening symphony, a crescendo of violence that filled the air. You could almost feel the wind whipped up by the hurtling lances as they tore through the very fabric of the air, invisible scythes seeking their mark. Despite the seemingly strict rules and elaborate courtesies, deadly accidents were a grim reality, a dark shadow lurking beneath the pomp and pageantry.
You recalled the chilling tale of a knight whose eye was pierced by a rogue lance, yet he miraculously continued to ride for 100 paces before finally collapsing, a testament to sheer willpower and brutal endurance. Every charge was a solemn promise of honor, a public declaration of courage, but also, in its chilling finality, a direct invitation to the grim reaper, a dance with death itself. Now imagine yourself as a privileged witness, your breath held captive by the sheer spectacle at a grand jousting tournament unfolding beneath the brilliant autumn sun in the heart of Paris. This was no mere exhibition for common amusement. This was a high-stakes arena where the fate of nations and the grievances of powerful men converged, all under the watchful, discerning eye of King Charles VI himself, his royal presence lending immense gravity to the proceedings. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, a palpable tension that vibrated through the very ground. On one side stood Sir Tristan, a knight of France, his very name a whispered legend, renowned for his unwavering composure and his exquisitely honed skill with the lance, a living embodiment of French chivalry. His opponent, across the link of the lists, was Sir Cedric, a formidable knight of England, whose outward arrogance was as sharp as his gleaming spurs, yet whose eyes held a dark, simmering hatred, deep and unfathomable as a poisoned well. Whispers, carried on the restless breeze like insidious seeds, drifted through the stands, planting doubts and fears in the hearts of the spectators. It was rumored that Cedric fought not merely for the glory of England, a noble cause in itself, but for a far more personal, far more venomous debt owed to Tristan. The tale, murmured in hushed tones, spoke of a woman, Elara, the love of Cedric's life, a bright star in his desolate world, who had been stolen by Tristan, her heart inexplicably drawn to the French knight. And now, adding layers of unbearable torment to the already bitter rivalry, Elara was Tristan's wife, her hand a constant, agonizing reminder of Cedric's loss, her presence a phantom limb of longing. The acrid scent of gunpowder from the cannons, signaling the start, mingling with the metallic tang of polished armor, hung heavy in the air, as the brass trumpets blared, their fanfare a chilling prelude to impending violence. The first pass was a blur of speed and steel, a test of nerve. Both knights charged with disciplined fury, their lances striking shields with bone-jarring force. The impact sent splinters flying like deadly confetti, yet both men remained firmly in their saddles, their resolve unbroken. The crowd roared its approval, a monstrous beast of 1,000 heads, its hunger temporarily sated. A second pass, a third, each one a testament to their skill and unwavering courage. But then came the fateful fourth charge, a joust that would forever be etched in the annals of this grim tournament. In a shocking, audacious deviation from all jousting etiquette, Cedric's lance, instead of aiming squarely for Tristan's shield, veered with chilling precision, intentionally targeting the subtle, vulnerable gap in Tristan's shoulder armor, a tiny chink in the formidable steel, a hidden weakness known only to a keen eye. You heard the sickening crunch of splintering armor, the dry, brittle snap of breaking bone, and the piercing, strangled cry of Elara from the stands, a sound of pure anguish that tore through the festive air like a poisoned dart. The violation was immediately apparent, a grotesque breach of sacred rules. But Cedric, instead of reining in his horse and withdrawing, as the laws of the joust absolutely demanded, shockingly drew his sword mid-gallop. His charger, a magnificent beast of war, skidded to a halt, and Cedric leapt from the saddle, landing with a heavy thud in the dusty lists. He then savagely lunged at the severely wounded Tristan, who lay helpless and disoriented on the ground, a fallen statue of valor. This was an act of unspeakable treachery, utterly forbidden in the solemn, ritualized combat of the joust, a crime against every code of chivalry. A collective gasp of horror, followed by a thunderous roar of outrage, erupted from the stunned crowd, echoing through the arena like a monstrous tsunami, washing over everything. Tristan's death that day was not the consequence of inferior skill or a noble misstep. It was the direct result of a brutal, cold-blooded act of foul play, a premeditated murder disguised as an accident. This horrific incident did not merely shock the tournament to its core, it shattered the fragile peace between France and England, plunging their already strained relationship into a severe diplomatic crisis, revealing that even within the most hallowed and ceremonial rituals, the savage, deceitful nature of man could, with chilling ease, violently erupt.
The immediate aftermath was a scene of utter chaos. Royal guards, their faces grim, swarmed the lists, restraining the triumphant yet blood-splattered Cedric. His eyes, still blazing with a terrifying, unholy light, were fixed on Elara in the stands, a chilling message of twisted victory. Elara, her face ashen, collapsed into the arms of her attendants, her sobs echoing like hammer blows against the sudden silence of the arena. King Charles VI, his face a mask of furious disbelief, rose from his royal box, his eyes burning with an icy rage that promised swift and brutal retribution. The joust, meant to resolve, had only deepened the chasm between nations and ignited a firestorm of personal vengeance. You watched the proceedings with a cold knot in your stomach. The crowd, moments ago a roaring beast of excitement, now writhed with a collective fury. They chanted, "Traitor! Murderer!" their voices a guttural demand for Cedric's immediate execution. The very air seemed to crackle with their righteous indignation, a palpable wave of anger directed at the disgraced English knight. You saw the English delegation, their faces pale with shock and embarrassment, exchange nervous glances. This was a nightmare, a diplomatic disaster of colossal proportions, unfolding before their very eyes. The trial of Sir Cedric was swift and brutal, a mere formality dictated by the king's outrage and the blatant evidence of his transgression. There was no need for lengthy arguments or intricate legal maneuvers. His actions were witnessed by thousands, including the king himself. The violation of the jousting rules was undeniable, a black mark against the very concept of chivalry. Cedric, surprisingly, offered no defense, no plea for mercy. His eyes, though devoid of their previous bloodlust, still held a defiant glint, perhaps a perverse satisfaction at having achieved his twisted revenge. He merely stated, his voice hoarse but firm, that Tristan had deserved his fate for stealing what was rightfully mine. The pronouncement of King Charles VI was delivered with chilling solemnity, his voice resonating with royal authority. Cedric was stripped of his knighthood, his spurs broken, his shield defaced, the ultimate humiliation for a knight. He was then condemned to be drawn and quartered, a death as agonizing and public as Tristan's own, a grim mirror reflecting his treachery. The swiftness of the justice, though satisfactory to the outraged crowds, sent a tremor through the noble ranks. It was a stark reminder that even the highest born could fall,
that the king's justice, once aroused, was as merciless as a winter storm. Amid the aftermath, your gaze returned to Elara. She was a woman utterly broken, a porcelain doll shattered by an unforeseen blow. Her once vibrant eyes were now vacant, shadowed by an impenetrable grief. You wondered about her own story, the truth behind Cedric's accusation. Was she truly stolen, or was her love for Tristan genuine? How much of Cedric's fury was rooted in actual betrayal, and how much in his own possessive delusion? Her silent tears were a river of sorrow, carving deep ravines on her pale cheeks, a testament to a love abruptly and violently severed. The king's justice might have been served, but it could not mend a broken heart, nor could it bring back the warmth of a man abruptly snatched away. The incident at the joust sent shockwaves far beyond Paris. Diplomatic envoys scrambled, couriers rode day and night, carrying urgent messages between the French and English courts. The fragile peace, a delicate tapestry woven with cautious treaties and tenuous alliances, now frayed at the edges, threatening to unravel completely. The spilled blood of Tristan, a crimson stain on the hallowed ground of the lists, seemed to prophesy a larger conflict, a dark cloud gathering on the horizon. The king's stern justice, while satisfactory in its immediate retribution, had also served to escalate tensions, creating new grievances that would linger like a bitter aftertaste.
The roar of the crowd, a monstrous, hungry beast, washed over the dusty lists, each voice a raw, guttural shout for blood and glory. You stood pressed against a wall of eager bodies, their collective anticipation a palpable weight in the air, thick and suffocating. The dull clatter of steel from the distant joust seemed to fade, replaced by a more immediate, chilling drama unfolding right beside you. A woman, her face a pale mask of terror, pushed desperately through the throng, her movements frantic as a trapped bird, her very being radiating an unmistakable scent of pure, unadulterated fear. Her eyes, wide and darting, scanned the faces around her, searching for escape, for salvation, for a haven in this sea of strangers. Behind her, two burly guards, their movements like predatory sharks, cut through the crowd with ruthless efficiency, their grim expressions promising capture. This wasn't the staged theatrics of the joust. This was real, raw fear, a desperate race against an unseen clock, where truth and survival hung in the balance. Jousting, you knew well, was far more than mere adherence to the stern pronouncements of law. It was the ultimate form of medieval entertainment, a vibrant tapestry woven from valor, violence, and popular fervor. You'd seen entire villages empty themselves, their inhabitants pouring into the makeshift arenas, cheering and roaring with an almost religious zeal, as if watching a divine play unfolding before their very eyes. Peddlers wove through the throngs, their cries echoing like the calls of distant birds, hawking warm beer and crusty bread. And sometimes those very crusts would fly through the air, repurposed as crude projectiles aimed at a particularly slow or cowardly combatant. The pungent aroma of stale ale and human sweat mingled in the air, creating a distinctive bouquet that clung to every jousting event, a signature scent of medieval festivity. Every swing of a sword, every pained grunt, every shattering blow was meticulously tracked by the ravenous crowd, as though they were devouring every agonizing detail, gorging themselves on the raw spectacle. If a knight lost a finger or suffered a particularly gruesome wound, that story would be retold with relish in taverns throughout the long dark winters, a gruesome legend passed down through generations. The drama wasn't solely derived from the visceral violence. It also sprang from the rich tapestry of characters involved. The brave young knight, his face still unlined by battle. The grizzled, experienced veteran, his armor scarred by countless skirmishes. Or even the unlucky common man who once lost a rigged bout to a belligerent goose, his humiliation a comedic legend. Today, you found yourself jostled within the dense crowd, the festive air a riot of noise and scent, the boisterous shouts of eager spectators blending with the sharp tang of cheap beer and the savory sizzle of roasting meat. The main event, a joust between two local knights, was underway, but it unfolded with a distinct lack of excitement. Both combatants too cautious, too absorbed in tentative probes and wary feints to deliver any decisive blows. Their movements were like two hesitant dancers, circling but never embracing. The crowd, a fickle beast, began to grow restless, their initial enthusiasm curdling into boos and impatient shouts. "Charge! Strike him down!" Their frustrated cries echoed across the lists, a chorus of disappointment. It was then, amidst this mundane backdrop, that you noticed a strange and compelling anomaly. Near where you stood, pressed against the surging bodies, a woman, her cloak pulled tight around her, was trying desperately to slip through the dense throng. It was Elara, the grieving wife of Sir Tristan, the knight so brutally murdered by Sir Cedric in the last joust, her face still etched with the raw pain of loss. In her hand, clutched so tightly her knuckles were white, was an old brittle parchment roll, its edges frayed with age. Her eyes, wide and darting, were filled with a raw, unadulterated panic, like a deer caught in a hunter's snare. The faint, sweet scent of dried roses, clinging to her worn sleeve, wafted past my nose, a delicate perfume tragically mixed with the acrid stench of pure, primal fear, a jarring juxtaposition.
Elara was clearly being pursued. You glimpsed two of the Lord's guards, their heavy surcoats bearing the Baron's crest, methodically cutting a path through the crowd, their stern faces fixed on her. Their movements were not casual, they were deliberate, predatory, like wolves closing in on their quarry. It was evident, with a chilling certainty, that the old parchment scroll she held contained a secret of immense importance, a truth she desperately needed to bring to light, a silent scream of injustice. This secret, you immediately surmised, must be directly connected to the brutal and illicit death of her husband, Tristan, turning his public demise into something far more sinister. The dull, uninspired spectacle on the jousting field abruptly transformed into a mere backdrop for a far more gripping drama unfolding within the teeming crowd. You stood at a perilous crossroads, the path before you split by a chasm of moral choice. You could remain a passive observer, blend back into the anonymous throng, and allow fate to take its course, letting Elara become just another casualty in the relentless machinery of power. Or you could, with a silent act of defiance, intervene, offering aid to a desperate woman, pulling her into the shadowy embrace of your protection. The frustrated shouts of the crowd, their voices still directed at the lackluster knights on the field, seemed not to touch Elara, her focus entirely consumed by the desperate need for escape. Her frantic flight, a silent ballet of terror, promised to unravel a larger conspiracy, a venomous web woven behind Tristan's death, turning his public demise into something far more sinister. It would force you to decide whether to plunge yourself into a perilous conflict, a battle fought not with gleaming swords or heavy armor, but with the fragile weapons of truth and courage. The hushed whispers behind your back, the soft murmurs of those who knew the court's dark secrets, seemed to confirm your deepest suspicions. Sometimes, the true drama, the most compelling acts of courage or villainy, never unfolded on the grand stage, but in the forgotten corners, in the desperate shadows of the audience itself.
Your eyes, usually so adept at observing without being noticed, were now fixed on Elara, every muscle in your body tensed, awaiting her next move. She moved with a desperate grace, her small frame weaving through the masses, bumping into burly peasants, sidestepping startled merchants, her sole purpose to escape her pursuers. But the guards were relentless, their powerful shoulders parting the crowd like a ship's prow cutting through water. They were closer now, their heavy breathing audible above the distant clamor of the joust, their hands already reaching out like grasping talons. You could see the glint of steel at their belts, a chilling promise of swift, brutal capture. A decision solidified in your mind, cold and sharp as a winter's blade. You couldn't stand by. The memory of Tristan's brutal death, the chilling sight of Cedric's betrayal still burned in your mind. Elara represented not just a woman in peril, but a chance for the truth to finally emerge, a fragile flame against a raging storm of deceit. This was your opportunity to be more than a mere observer, to step from the shadows and perhaps to tip the scales of an unjust world. You quickly scanned your surroundings. A narrow alleyway, usually filled with refuse and discarded goods, opened up just a few feet from Elara, a dark, inviting maw in the wall of the bustling crowd. It was a gamble, a risky maneuver, but it might just be her only chance. As Elara was about to be seized, her hand brushing against a startled bystander, you acted. It was not a grand gesture, no heroic charge. Instead, with a practiced subtlety honed by years of navigating crowded spaces unnoticed, you merely shifted your weight, a deliberate, almost imperceptible movement, and accidentally tripped a nearby cart piled high with empty beer barrels. The sudden crash of wood and thunderous clatter of rolling barrels created a chaotic cascade of noise and confusion, a symphony of unexpected disarray that momentarily stunned the guards and distracted the surrounding crowd, their heads swiveling like startled owls.
In that fleeting moment of bewildered pandemonium, Elara gasped, her eyes locking with yours, a silent flash of understanding gassing between you. Without hesitation, she darted into the newly created gap, slipping into the dark embrace of the alleyway, her small form vanishing like a wisp of smoke. The guards, momentarily thrown off balance, cursed loudly, their frustrated shouts echoing in the wake of her escape. By the time they recovered their bearings, the crowd had surged forward, closing the gap, and Elara was gone, swallowed by the labyrinthine alleys of Paris. You remained rooted to your spot, outwardly calm, your heart hammering a frantic rhythm against your ribs, a drum solo of adrenaline. No one seemed to notice your subtle intervention, your silent hand in the unfolding drama. You waited, your muscles tense, until the guards, barking orders and pushing through the crowd, disappeared in the direction Elara had taken. Then, with an almost imperceptible movement, you slipped away from the now dispersing throng, melting into the narrower side streets. Your peasant cunning, honed by years of observing and surviving, guided your steps. You knew these back alleys, these forgotten arteries of the city, better than any guardsman. You moved with a purpose, your mind alight with the thrilling, terrifying implications of what you had just done. You were no longer just a witness, you were an accomplice, a silent partner in Elara's desperate flight for truth. The parchment roll. What secrets did it hold? What dark truth about Tristan's death, about Cedric's motives, was so dangerous that it warranted a desperate chase through a jousting crowd? You recalled Cedric's chilling words during his trial, his cold claim that Tristan had stolen what was rightfully mine. Was Elara a willing participant in their love, or a pawn caught between two powerful men? The deeper implications of Father Benoît's involvement in Sir Kaelan's duel, his subtle manipulation and dark influence, now resonated with a chilling clarity. Was this another thread in a larger, more sinister tapestry of deceit woven by those in power? The very air in Paris seemed suddenly thick with hidden agendas, with secrets that could unravel the very fabric of the court. Your heart ached for Elara, a woman who, like Isolde and so many others, found herself caught in the cruel gears of a world dominated by men and their ruthless ambitions. Her courage in fleeing with that parchment was a testament to a strength often underestimated in women of that era, a quiet fire burning fiercely within her. You knew that this act of defiance, this desperate search for truth, would not be easy. It would require cunning, perseverance, and perhaps a sacrifice you weren't yet prepared to make. But having tasted the bitter fruit of injustice and seen the relentless pursuit of truth in Elara's eyes, you knew you could not turn back. The true spectacle, the real drama, was just beginning, and it would not be played out on the jousting field, but in the treacherous shadows of the court, where the only weapons were whispers and the only currency was truth. This new journey, you realized, would force you to delve deeper into the hidden machinations of power, revealing that even in a world obsessed with blood, beer, and ballads, the quiet courage of an ordinary person could shift the very course of destiny.
The cold stone walls of the Parisian courtroom seemed to hum with an unfamiliar energy, a quiet tension replacing the usual clamor of the lists. Gone were the clatter of steel, the thunder of hooves, and the primal roars of the crowd. Here, the air, usually thick with the metallic tang of blood and the earthy scent of churned mud, now carried the faint, crisp aroma of parchment and dried ink, a ghostly perfume of nascent jurisprudence. Before you, a young, resolute judge, his face etched with a quiet, revolutionary determination, declared a recent duel's outcome null and void, his voice ringing with the clarity of a freshly struck bell, announcing a new dawn. This was not a swift, brutal judgment by steel. This was a meticulous, patient quest for truth, a slow, methodical unearthing of facts. It was a silent revolution, a gradual but profound shift in the very bedrock of justice, away from the capricious whims of divine judgment and towards the tangible weight of human evidence. The echoes of shattered lances and dying groans still resonated in the collective memory, but here, in this hushed chamber, a new kind of battle was being waged, fought not with swords, but with words, testimonies, and the quiet, persistent pursuit of undeniable truth. The end of a duel, regardless of its victor or its vanquished, always left behind more than just broken bodies and splintered lances. It carved scars into the earth, and more profoundly, into the souls of those who witnessed it. You had seen firsthand how minor skirmishes could irrevocably reshape a single life, altering its trajectory with a single blow. And you had heard the whispered legends of grander contests, battles that, like the duel of Jean de Carouge and Jacques Legris in 1386, forever altered the course of history. That particular clash, vividly recounted in the annals of medieval France, stood as one of the last officially sanctioned judicial duels in French history, a final bloody chapter in a dying era. As justice by the sword, that brutal, dramatic ballet gradually yielded its place to a more intricate and often bewildering legal system, these dramatic, personal contests left behind a strange and haunting legacy, like ghostly echoes in empty halls. You often found yourself pondering whether humanity had truly progressed, or if our methods of seeking justice had merely grown more sophisticated, more veiled, while the core of human nature, its capacity for cruelty, its desperate need for vindication, remained stubbornly unchanged. The solemn oaths of honor, the buried secrets whispered only to the shadows, and the brutal reality of medieval existence still resonated powerfully into your present day, reminding you with a chilling clarity that truth sometimes was written not with the clean stroke of a quill, but with the raw, visceral grit of blood and sweat.
This final narrative journey now brings you back to those twilight years of trial by combat, to a pivotal moment where the old ways began their slow, reluctant retreat. You were witnessing a court proceeding in the heart of Paris, a scene utterly devoid of the usual martial fanfare. There were no gleaming swords, no heavy plate armor, no thundering hooves. Instead, the austere air of the courtroom, quiet and solemn, was permeated by the dry, crisp scent of ink and parchment, replacing the visceral odors of blood and mud that had defined so many previous encounters. Presiding over this nascent evolution of justice was a young, sharp-minded jurist, Judge Antoine. His reputation, whispered in hushed tones among the legal scholars, was that of a man dedicated to logic and meticulous inquiry, a true anomaly in a system often swayed by patronage and brute force. With a quiet conviction that belied his youth, he was adamantly overturning the outcome of a recent, regionally conducted trial by combat. Instead, with an authority as crisp as the crackle of a fresh fire, he demanded the painstaking collection of empirical evidence and the careful, detailed testimonies of witnesses. This was a tiny revolution, a slow-burning ember of change, yet profoundly significant in the way justice was now being conceived and executed. His rulings were like careful surgical incisions, dissecting the old, flawed system to reveal the raw, beating heart of true inquiry beneath. You would now bear witness to the profound and evolving fates of two remarkable women whose lives had intersected with the brutal, often arbitrary hand of medieval justice. First, Isolde, who had endured a harrowing ordeal of false accusations and whose champion had triumphed in a trial by combat, granting her freedom. Her life, once a labyrinth of fear and desperate uncertainty, had finally found peace. She was no longer a bird trapped in a cage of false accusations. She had dedicated the remainder of her days to tirelessly aiding other unjustly accused women, her past suffering now a potent fuel for her compassion. You observed the steadfast resolve in her eyes, no longer the haunted gaze of a captive bird, but the unwavering, purposeful gaze of a woman who had, against all odds, found her true freedom, her spirit as unyielding as ancient stone. She established a small, quiet network, a haven for women seeking legal redress, her wisdom a beacon in their darkest hours, her own experience a living testament to the possibility of reclaiming one's voice. Then there was Elara, whose desperate flight from the jousting grounds had forced her into the treacherous dance of revelation. After heroically unearthing and exposing the intricate conspiracy behind her beloved Tristan's brutal death, a dark tapestry woven from Cedric's personal vendetta and the subtle machinations of hidden powers, she had embarked on a protracted, agonizing struggle to ensure that justice, true justice, was ultimately served through this new fledgling legal system. Her path was fraught with peril, with powerful enemies lurking in the shadows, their influence as insidious as creeping ivy. The proof she carried, that very parchment that had saved her life, became her primary weapon, a silent, irrefutable voice in the hallowed halls of nascent law. You witnessed Elara navigate this complex new landscape, her courage as sharp as any knight's blade.
She faced skepticism, resistance, and the ingrained biases of a system still learning to shed its skin of old customs. Yet fueled by the memory of Tristan's unjust end and her own profound grief, she persisted, her determination a steady flame in the swirling winds of opposition. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths, a gentle whisper that resonated louder than any battle cry, cutting through the thick air of antiquated prejudice. She championed the very evidence you had helped her secure, that hidden dagger, that lock of hair, transforming them from mere objects into powerful symbols of truth, forcing the authorities to confront the ugly reality behind the jousting tragedy.
What you had experienced, from the raw, mud-stained duels of peasants to the grand yet equally brutal spectacles of knights, culminating in this quiet revolution of the courts, taught you a profound truth. Even as the era changed, as the clang of steel slowly yielded to the scratching of quills, the fundamental human battle for fairness, for recognition, for an honest reckoning remained fiercely unchanged. The forms of justice might evolve, becoming more refined, more intellectual, but the essence of the struggle endured. A secret, deeply buried beneath the sands of time, was that regardless of how the form of justice might transform, the voices of the vulnerable, the cries of the unjustly wronged, would forever demand to be heard, resonating powerfully through the ages like church bells pealing in triumph after a long-fought battle. The fates of Isolde and Elara became powerful testaments to this evolving landscape. Isolde, free from fear, a quiet advocate, became a symbol of how the old system, in its own crude way, could sometimes deliver a brutal form of justice, allowing a wronged woman to reclaim her life. Elara, the determined widow navigating the complexities of the new legal world, represented the slow, arduous, but ultimately hopeful path towards a more systematic and reasoned form of justice. Her tireless efforts eventually led to the official, though quiet, re-examination of Tristan's death, solidifying the charges against Cedric beyond the immediate punishment, staining his legacy with the truth of his treachery rather than merely his public defeat. As you reflected on this journey, from the bloody fields of honor to the hushed chambers of deliberation, you understood that justice was not a fixed concept, but a living, breathing entity, constantly shifting, adapting, and striving for a more perfect form, driven by the persistent human yearning for fairness. The echoes of those medieval duels, of the desperate cries for vengeance and vindication, still lingered, a haunting reminder of the brutal past. But the quiet strength of women like Isolde and Elara, their unwavering pursuit of truth, and their resilience in the face of immense adversity, offered a glimpse into a future where the whispers of the wronged could finally become a powerful, undeniable chorus, strong enough to shake the very foundations of power. This story had unveiled a hidden truth, that the true measure of a society's justice lies not just in its grand pronouncements, but in its willingness to listen to the faintest, most vulnerable voices, and to allow their quiet courage to reshape the very world. That brings our journey through the shadowy courts and dusty battlefields of medieval France to a close. Thank you for venturing with us through tales of honor, betrayal, and the enduring fight for justice. If these echoes from the past resonated with you, please leave a like as a sign of your approval. Subscribe to our channel for more untold stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until our next adventure into history, may your days be filled with truth and courage.